Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here, and today on the channel we are going to be taking a deep dive look at the life and times of one of the most striking looking fighters in the entirety of the Capcom universe. Every single fighter in Street Fighter 2 is memorable in appearance and stands out in their own ways, but out of all of these colourful cast members, perhaps none are quite as strange and unique as that of Blanka. The Brazilian Incredible Hulk looking fellow who has the ability to emit electricity to use against his foes has captivated gamers with his absurdity for many years. But the big question for the majority of gamers is, what the bloody hell is he? And why is he fighting in Street Fighter 2 and many other games? Let's look back at Blanka's entire fighting career and how he fits into the world of Street Fighter. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Blanka. Yeah! But first, a quick word from me. I have opened a brand new channel called Top Hat Wrestling Man, where we look at bizarre stories from wrestling history. After you have seen today's content here, why not check out my latest upload on Kurt Angle's weird brother Eric Angle. But do not worry, I will remind you all about the wrestling again later in this content. So for now, back to Blanka. As most people would be aware, Blanka first popped up in 1991 within the legendary title known as Street Fighter 2. But what may not be immediately apparent is that staff at Capcom had already been developing the character for a few years prior to this. As discussed before on this channel, there was a point in time when Final Fight was test marketed as Street Fighter 89, and Akira Yasuda, who would go on to work on Street Fighter 2, worked as a planner on this beat 'em up. It was during the development of this game that Yasuda would come up with his first early design for Blanka, who at that point was an African man named Anabebe, who was raised by a lion. Moving on to the development of Street Fighter 2, Yasuda would continue to work on this conceptual character until he eventually morphed it into a large man with thick hair and sideburns, being given the name Hammer Blanka. The decision to adapt this design further by giving him the strange green appearance and the feral-like characteristics was simply down to the fact that Yasuda felt that the Street Fighter 2 roster needed more diversity. To put it simply, they were concerned that the roster would be a tad dull with only human-looking fighters. The Blanka who would emerge in Street Fighter 2 featured very prominent physical characteristics, such as his vivid green colour. The initial idea behind why it looked this way was because he grew up in a jungle environment in Brazil, having a completely plant-based diet. The chlorophyll in his food would affect his skin colour, eventually becoming green permanently. Kind of like those people we used to hear about as children, who apparently had turned yellow due to drinking too much Sunny Delight. Did that ever actually happen? This incredibly ridiculous reason for Blanka looking so strange was adapted and instead was attributed to him being on a plane as a small boy that got struck by lightning during an electrical storm in which would cause the aircraft to crash. The young boy would wake up in a jungle but would emerge with strange new powers, including the ability to emit electricity. Basically, they gave him an origin story that was the same as many Marvel superheroes. He gained special abilities due to an accident and learned to fight due to growing up in the jungle. In Japan, this tale would be told slightly differently, as rather than the plane coming down in freak weather, the crash was instead caused by Shadaloo, so that they could kill a Brazilian minister on board. While green skin has always remained a trademark of the character, additional palette swaps would allow gamers to play as Blanka in a range of different colours too. In terms of his fighting capabilities, Blanka is said to fight with a self-taught animalistic style. However, when Street Fighter 2 first showed up in the West, Capcom USA's division decided to refer to this style as Capoeira, the Afro-Brazilian martial art that combines elements of dance, acrobatics and music. His most well-known signature attack is probably his ability to emit electricity. When crouching, Blanka can throw off an electric current, shocking anyone stupid enough to come into contact with him. Away from this trademark manoeuvre, Blanka fights mainly relying on his speed and unpredictability. Unfortunate foes who have to fight this man are often caught off guard by his appearance, allowing Blanka to surprise opponents even further with his dynamic arsenal of moves and sudden ferocious attacks. These manoeuvres include many of his infamous rolling attacks, which can make him a tough cookie to crack, when paired with his awesome evasiveness, which is aided by his ability to jump very fast. All in all, this makes Blanka a master of jumping over oncoming projectiles and countering attacks in unusual ways. In Street Fighter 2, Blanka is entered into the second World Warrior tournament, due to acquiring a taste for fighting which he would gain following the events of the plane crash and living in the wild for so long. Eventually Blanka would find a local village, where he would make connections leading to him fighting in the tournament. In a lucky twist of fate though, for the feral fighter, his birth mother would recognise him on a televised broadcast of his matches by the anklets he wears. In Blanka's ending in Street Fighter 2, she addresses him by his birth name, Jimmy, and reveals that she gave him the anklets before he was in a plane crash as a little boy, bringing his Street Fighter 2 tale to a close. As we know, the success of Street Fighter 2 would lead to a live-action Hollywood motion picture, which is where Blanka would obviously show up next. To understand his appearance fully here, we have to go back to Street Fighter 2 the video game, where in Guile's ending he accuses M. Bison of killing his friend Charlie in Cambodia. The same Charlie, aka Nash, who would go on to be a playable fighter in various Street Fighter games in the future. This is important as in the movie the writers chose to make both Charlie and Blanka just one single character. To put it simply, near the beginning of the movie, Guile's close friend Carlos Blanka, nicknamed Charlie, gets taken captive by Bison. Being held prisoner by the evil dictator, Bison subjects Blanka to genetic testing in his quest to create the perfect soldier. This is what gives Blanka his strange appearance and unique abilities within the movie's own canon. This same version of Blanka would obviously show up as a playable fighter within the Street Fighter movie games, but around this time frame Blanka would also appear in the Japanese Street Fighter animated movie, where he makes a more brief appearance. In this animation he is being held captive in a luxury hotel, but is lowered from a cage to fight Zangief, for the guests' evening of entertainment. In the world of video games though, Blanka would not turn up quite as frequently as many of the other fighters from Street Fighter 2. His next appearance would not be until early 1998, in the polygonal fighting game published by Eureka known as Street Fighter EX2. According to the story of EX2, it is said that Blanka was in disbelief that he missed out on the first EX tournament, and was shocked that the World Warriors chose to compete without him. He entered the tournament caring little for winning or losing, but simply wanting to go wild and have a good time. During the tournament, Blanka becomes captivated by Dhalsim's ability to contort his body in strange ways. During these events, Dhalsim took pity on Blanka, seeing the mind of a harmonious creature trapped inside a body that others found frightening. In fact, when EX3 was released in later years, Blanka would return, and since the game is a tag team affair, he would select Dhalsim as his partner, an offer that Dhalsim would graciously accept. In terms of Capcom developed Street Fighter games, Blanka would finally return to their fold in mid-98 with the release of Street Fighter Alpha 3. As discussed on here many times before, the Alpha games serve as the story precursor to Street Fighter 2, occurring shortly after the events of the 1987 original Street Fighter game. In Alpha 3, the title gives us a glimpse of Blanka's life prior to entering the Second World Warrior Tournament. In this game, Blanka eats a melon on a poacher's truck and unwittingly travelled to civilization for the first time. Through the events of this story, he faces off against Dan Hibiki and later Zangief, who he unknowingly sabotages the chances of from destroying the criminal organisation known as Shadaloo. Eventually, he faces off against and defeats Balrog, before finally fighting M. Bison. In Blanka's Alpha 3 story, Blanka works together with Dan and Sakura to destroy Bison's Psycho Drive. Although it is worth noting that characters' endings throughout the game are contradictory to one another, so who really knows what and what isn't supposed to be canon at this point. It would once again be a while before Blanka would appear in more fighting games, but in the early 2000s would show up in Capcom vs SNK and Capcom vs SNK 2, with both games utilising Blanka's Alpha 3 sprite work, marking Blanka's first ever appearances in Capcom crossover games as a playable fighter. While Blanka would miss out on being included in Street Fighter 3 completely, he would be included in Street Fighter 4, the game that acts as the chronological sequel to Street Fighter 2, but a prequel to Street Fighter 3. The events of Street Fighter 2 closed, if we can recall, with Blanka being found by his mother, but sadly the pair did not truly live happily ever after, due to people staring at Blanka everywhere he went. Frustrated, he heads to Hong Kong to visit his old friend who he made in Alpha 3, Dan. Upon meeting up with him, Dan, who obviously was not in Street Fighter 2, was keen to learn all about what it was like for Blanka competing in the Second World Warrior Tournament. This leads to him, Dan and another old friend Sakura all entering the Sin Tournament, with Blanka choosing to do so to earn the world's respect, so that people stop giving him funny looks all the time. While doing fairly well in the tournament, Blanka loses in the final stages. His story in Street Fighter 4 wraps in Sin's headquarters, where he runs into Dan as the place is going up in flames. Thankfully for both of them, the flames are put out by Sakura, who is now joined by Ryu, meaning they all survived that day. It is soon revealed that during the Sin tournament his mother went looking for him, and again the game ends with them reunited, with Blanka resolving not to be concerned by staring faces, as all that really matters is his relationship with his mother. Returning home with this new positive outlook, Blanka discovers local visitors have arrived at his home to meet him, and as a result makes many new friends in his hometown. Digging around on the information superhighway, I managed to find an old interview from 2008 where Street Fighter IV producer Yoshinori Ono was interviewed around the time this game was released, and even gives additional comments on Blanka. In this interview he acknowledges that he is aware of how popular Street Fighter II and fighting games in general would become in Brazil over the years, but states he would like to give a special message to all Brazilians, stating,
"I would like to apologize because I know that Blanka seems to be a strange character, and I don't want any Brazilian to feel uncomfortable with that. When Blanka was conceived, we knew there was a forest in Brazil, so we thought it might look like this. I was even a little nervous when I heard that I would meet Brazilian journalists today. Well, but about the message, this is the first Street Fighter in 10 years, so we would like all fans to play, including the Brazilians."
At this point Ono is cut off by the interviewer, who responds that Brazilians love Blanka, with Ono simply replying,
"Ah, good. I was even afraid of being beaten when I went to Sao Paulo."
If you browse online, it becomes clear pretty quickly as to why Ono felt an element of trepidation when speaking about Blanka, and the stage backdrop in which he originally fought in. Over the years, online gaming journalists from the United States and Western Europe had slowly begun to obsess over identity politics, and continuously writing critical pieces about Street Fighter II being a game full of racist stereotypes. This was a narrative that websites were continuing to spin in order to get maximum clicks for their poorly written clickbait journalism. In the mid-2010s, Street Fighter V would finally be announced. In the early promotional stages, Yoshinori Ono would show off a Brazilian stage, during which he was even seen wearing a Blanka costume, obviously leading to many people instantly believing Blanka was being revealed for the game. Interestingly though, Blanka was nowhere to be seen, and instead a Street Fighter newcomer was introduced named Laura, a brand spanking new Brazilian fighter who, unlike Blanka before her, was produced with the actual input of people who are from Brazil. Bearing in mind that Brazil now had a more realistic representative in the game, you could assume that the story of Blanka was over by this point. But thankfully, to the delight of Street Fighter fans everywhere, Yoshinori did not give in to cancel culture, and Blanka would later be added to the game as a DLC fighter. In Blanka's redesign for Street Fighter V, his hair has grown longer and wild on his head, limbs and chest. He even now has additional orange hair lining his limbs. Although, if you want Blanka to look more traditional, his appearance in Street Fighter II became his nostalgic costume in this modern game. In the Street Fighter V story, which occurs after the events of Street Fighter IV, Blanka is back in Brazil, but is now selling dolls known as Blanka-chan. While doing this job, he meets Laura for the first time, who accidentally steps on one of his dolls. This leads to a fight between the pair of them, but after managing to defeat her, Laura apologises and calls Sean to help Blanka out. Sean advises him to sell the dolls in Japan instead, as he believes there would be a bigger market for them over there. This leads to Blanka later being in a Japanese arcade, where a somewhat comical scene occurs where he accidentally breaks one of the arcade machines, but regrets it, claiming the machine would not last a day in the jungle. His tale ends with Sakura arriving and reuniting with him, with her deciding to tell the arcade manager about the Blanka-chan dolls, and that they should be put inside the machine. This leads to his dolls becoming popular with almost everyone in Japan. However, Blanka is not made aware of this, bringing his strange tale to a close for now. In regards to Blanka's story in Street Fighter V, the inclusion of dolls may seem pretty random at first, but according to Yoshinori Ono, there is a reason for all of this. It is no secret that Blanka is his favourite character, and those with a keen eye will notice he carries around a small Blanka doll himself. It was revealed by Ono on the Nintendo channel that he obtained this aforementioned toy along with a few extras from the hamburger restaurant known as Jollibee's. He got a Jollibee's kids meal set in the Philippines, which functions similar to the Happy Meals from McDonald's. The Blanka-chan dolls in the game directly reference Ono's own doll that he carries. In addition to all of this, Blanka would make many other appearances over the years, with a more notable one being in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, where he would once again show up as DLC. In the game, he teams with Sakura in search of Pandora's box, which they eventually find rescuing Dan from within it. Blanka would also show up as a stage boss within Street Fighter Cross Mega Man and appear as an available fighter within Puzzle Fighter. In a more obtuse appearance, there is armour in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate that can make your character look like Blanka. All in all though, this covers many of the key elements of this unique character's tale and highlights that there is far more to this character than meets the eye, than to those who just so have happened to have bumped into him in a round of Street Fighter. If you enjoyed this look back at this Street Fighter character, I'm actually doing something similar on my brand new channel Top Hat Wrestling Man, where we look at the careers of some of wrestling's less appreciated performers. I have just uploaded a video on Kurt Angle's forgotten brother, Eric Angle, so why not check it out if you fancy a bit of sports entertainment from me. From here though, be sure to let me know in the comments which Street Fighter you would like to see me highlight next, as thus far we have only got through Blanka, Cammy and Akuma, so who should I do now? Huge thank yous go out to those who back the channel on Patreon. Your support goes a long way in helping me do what I do. Special shoutouts for doing so go out to Sebastian Velez, A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Heo Paulo Lopez, Ban Haradine, Corey Imar Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinch, Evan Border, Philip Namph, Azra Arkai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Michael Calix, Ago, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sanghi, Wenker, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cole, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, Dan Van Dammit, Louis Fiant, John Bates, David Bell, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazanski, Gunther Hendricks and everybody else who backs me on the Patreon platform. Thanks for everybody else who watched today too. Love you all. Yeah!